What are the best months to drive for Uber and Lyft? This is a question I just got. I've never talked about this, surprisingly, in any other video, but this actually is a pretty big deal, especially A, if you drive full-time, and B, even if you drive part-time, you're still semi-relying on that Uber and Lyft income. And it brings up a very unique story. So when I was driving in Boston, like I said in a lot of other videos, I started off part-time, just did it here and there to make some side cash. It helped kind of fuel my YouTube/music career I was pursuing and everything. It was great. The second though I switched to full-time, like I said, I was relying on that income. I had no other sources of income, and I noticed that there was a clear difference in the best times to drive in Boston depending upon the months. Now, of course, like I've said in a lot of other videos, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make with Lyft and Uber. There's just so many factors to your location in terms of, are you an independent contractor or an employee in that area? What about the just overall layouts, et cetera, et cetera. But one big thing that I find is the biggest determinant is the overall climate. Now in Boston, this question was specifically related to Boston. Here's what I found. The best months to drive were typically the winter/fall months and spring. So I'd say, if I had to give like an exact spread, I'd say about September-ish, September, October, to about, I'd say April or May-ish. Those were like the sweet months to drive for a couple different reasons. One, as you can imagine, when it rains or snows, because the weather in Boston can get wicked bad, as we say, during the winter times, surges go up, people are ordering Lyfts and Ubers. The second thing, in addition to that, is the public transportation in Boston is the T. So if the T breaks down and people are relying on that to get to work, surges go up because a lot of people are ordering Ubers and Lyfts. This is also true not just for Boston, even though I'm using that as an example, but like say for Chicago, for New York, pretty much any other kind of more wintry climate-like area, right? Like we expect, looking at the Northeast, for example, that Boston during the winter is going to be pretty bad. The second thing, which is huge, I think especially for Boston, almost compared to maybe any other city in America, although there may be some, comparisons, is the colleges. And that is when college students were in Boston from September, like I said, to about April or May-ish, typically about May, they were ordering Lyfts and Ubers all the time. And what I found, and again, I've never mentioned this in any other video, is that by the time May or June kind of came about, I was making significantly less money. And my kind of pattern, I know it sounds kind of interesting, is during the summers, I find was horrible. Horrible time to drive in Boston. Might be counterintuitive for some people, but it was a horrible time to drive. So what I actually would do is do full time. And then I got this gig, it's like a part-time gig. It was like 20-ish hours a week, give or take, at a real estate office where I'd call other landlords, kind of doing like an administrative work. I was making like, at the time, I think it was like $16-ish an hour. And I'm like, hey, during the summer, that's actually better working like say 5 or 6 hours a day, making $16 an hour, than going out and driving for Uber and Lyft, making probably less than that. And I'm putting miles on my car in terms of depreciation, gas, taxes, all this kind of stuff. So I actually go back and forth. When, like, say, the summertime would end, because in case you didn't know, especially in the real estate world, especially in a place like Boston, which deals with rentals, the summer is like crazy, crazy busy because a lot of people are moving in September. And then when September hit, I'd switch back to Uber and Lyft, right? It was kind of this back and forth thing because the summer just wasn't good. So one, if you live, let's say, in a conventionally wintry climate during the winter months where it's like really, really bad weather, I think the summers are usually not that good to drive. Now, granted, every area is different. I want to make that very clear. Every city is different, but this is a very important point. Now, looking at the other side of that coin, if you live in a city that's, like, say, very summer focused, Los Angeles is a prime example of this. Miami is another great example of this. When I've interviewed drivers in San Diego or Los Angeles or Miami or whatever, in these kind of more like summery focused like areas, it's almost the opposite. During the winter, and during the kind of like, it's not really winter, it's more like colder months is the best way to word it. I find, and I've heard, that they say that the rideshare market and the amount of money they make just isn't that good. However, during the summers, because there's a ton of tourism, people coming in, of course, it's very, very nice out, so people want to go out. They might want to go to the beach and not have to worry about parking. They might be drinking and consuming alcohol, right? They might be having a Sunday fun day, whatever the case is. They find that the summer months pay way more. So I find that's very interesting because, like I said, when I was in Boston, it was the complete opposite. During the winter was almost like the prime time to drive. I mean, I've said this before. There were some weeks where I'd make 60 an hour sometimes because the T broke down. They couldn't fix it. It's snowing. It's raining. People need to get to work. And I'd make really good money. The second that summer hits, nope. Especially not only with the summer being nicer out. So people are like, hey, why take an Uber and Lyft when we can walk there or take the T, right? But in addition, all the college kids leaving Boston, not the best time to drive. On the other end, a place like here in Los Angeles or Miami, these kind of more summery focused areas, especially involving the tourism, you're definitely going to make way more money during, like, say, the spring to maybe beginning of fall months. So I might say almost the complete opposite of Boston. Like, say, for LA or Miami, you might be looking at, like, say, like May-ish till about like August, maybe September. Those are the best times to drive. Same thing, I think Vegas might be a good example of this too, because a lot of people go to Vegas, of course, when it's really sunny out and really nice out. So it is something I think to be aware of. And like I said in the beginning of this video, if you are driving part-time and you're just doing it to get some side cash because you're like, hey, why not? Not as big of a deal to be this like specifically focused on one of the best months to drive. But if you're doing this full-time, like I did, I realized that in the good months to drive in Boston, I'm doing it full time. But in the bad months to drive in Boston, I realized I was way better off getting a different job. And maybe for you, if actually you are in that kind of situation where you're realizing like, wow, the summer's great, but the winter's bad, or vice versa. I'm not gonna lie, especially with, as I've done videos about recently, costs going up, pay being less and less for a lot of drivers. During those really bad months to drive, you may be better off looking for another job.